Okay, good morning and welcome everybody. And yes, welcome to our first carbonNEXT Carbon Talks event of 2023. Very excited for today's session. Today we'll be talking about COP27 and CCUS, specifically reviewing the outcomes from the event and the momentum of the CCUS and carbon management industries. I'm going to move right along because we have lots to get through. Shannon, if you can just advance one slide, please. Before starting the discussion, I do want to acknowledge with gratitude and respect that we are all on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples here in Canada. I myself am calling in from Vancouver today. So I am on the traditional and unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I do encourage you to all please put in the chat where you're calling in from today and what territories you're on. Next slide. For those that don't know, carbonNEXT is a joint venture between two organizations, Carbon Management Canada, which is Canada's CO2 industry CO2 solutions hub with a core focus on advancing CCUS solutions, and Foresight Canada, which is Canada's largest clean tech accelerator, which has supported over 900 ventures, has helped secure over $1.25 billion in capital, and has had an economic impact of over $2 billion. And together we play to each other's strength to enable the next round of CCUS technology innovation in Canada. In terms of the agenda for today, opening remarks, I'm going to try to keep it brief. I know I'm diving right into it, not letting people get much time to land here, but I do want to give lots of time to the panelists. There's a great panelist that will make us help us make sense of the discussion today, and I'll introduce them in a moment. After the panelist conversations, we're going to have moderated Q&A, and then we're going to leave 10 to 15 minutes for audience questions at the end. I'm going to aim to close at the top of the hour. That's the agenda for today. And if there's no concerns, I'm going to move along. Just quickly, carbonNEXT, just for those that are not familiar, carbonNEXT is Canada's CCUS-specific accelerator program and aims to commercialize and scale Canadian clean tech and CCUS companies. And we do that by building a collaborative ecosystem that connects carbon tech solutions to real market needs, by leveraging infrastructure, especially technology validation infrastructure, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Also by growing and scaling carbon tech ventures through training, mentoring, and providing access and introduction to capital. For example, we do that through our business-specific training, also through our executive in residence programs. And lastly, we're driving domestic international adoption of these solutions by heavy emitters, and we often act as a liaison between the solution providers and heavy emitters, making connections. And one thing we do is we run innovation challenges, industry innovation challenges. And at the end of the talk, we'll introduce our latest innovation challenge that is very relevant to today's discussion. One thing we're very proud of is the Canadian CCUS Research and Technologies Network, which is an organization between a network between 5 organizations representing 10 really cutting-edge CCUS-specific testing and validation facilities. And historically, these have been challenging to access. And by acting as a network, we can provide one window access to connect the entrepreneurs and startups to the facilities that best meet their needs. And we at carbonNEXT actually operate the concierge service to this one window access. These are our carbonNEXT KPIs. I'm not going to describe them in detail, just to say that we're very proud of them. We're on track to meet them, and we're really grateful of the great technology companies at making this a reality. And I do have to provide one last plug. We currently still have our application process for the 2023 carbonNEXT cohort open. Here we provide CCI-specific training to startups, and we run great sessions like understanding industry needs, how to form strategic partnerships, accessing global markets, how to monetize your technology, sessions like this. So if you do have a CCUS solution, or you know somebody that does, you can still sign up. The training is free of charge, but the window closes tomorrow, so you have to act quickly. You can either scan the QR code here, or you can write Shannon. Shannon, I think you can put your email in the chat, right? Great. And now we're going to meet the panelists. We're really, really happy to have them here, distinguished panelists. We have Michael Leitch, the technical lead of XPRIZE carbon removal. We have Ben Rubin, who is executive director of the Carbon Business Council, and Mark Cameron, who is vice president of external relations at Pathways Alliance. And before I hand it over to the panelists, I do want to just highlight a couple of terms. Shannon, if you can go to the next slide, please. Today we're going to talk about, at a high level, at a 30,000 foot level, we're going to talk about two concepts: industry CCS, so carbon capture of industry point source emissions, and then sequestering and utilizing these, and this can be energy or process emissions. And I believe Mark is going to be talking more about this. And also carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere and the oceans. This includes direct air capture, mineralization, and others. And I do just want to make sure we're going to be talking about these two parts of the CCS value chain. We're going to try to be explicit and clear when we talk about what. I just want to highlight that. And we do have our CCS graphic here. I'm not going to dive into this, but we'll be sharing our slide deck so you can look at that afterwards. But now I'm going to pass it over to Michael Leitch. Michael comes from the XPRIZE Foundation with 8 years of experience in design, engineering, and energy research. As a technical manager for the Energy COSIA Carbon XPRIZE, Mr. Leitch supports the technical and scientific operations for the competition. Mr. Leitch is trained as a machinist, holds a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Calgary, and a master's degree in engineering management from the University of Alberta. As a carbon fiber enthusiast, outside of the office, you can find him racing high-performance sailboats and bicycles. Michael, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Maxi, for the introduction and for teeing things up here. And in particular, I appreciated you spending a moment talking about sort of the terminology. I think the taxonomy and the carbon management scene is really important. You know, I've had the opportunity at XPRIZE to work on programs both related to CCUS, the utilization side, and the CDR side. And so I'm just going to I'll talk about both of those very briefly. But first of all, just, you know, what is an XPRIZE? The whole point of an XPRIZE is to, one, identify an important problem whose solution will benefit humanity. Two, offer a large reward for demonstrations of a solution. Three, cultivate a cohort and shine a spotlight on their work. And in doing so, we aim to create whole new industries. That's really what XPRIZes are about. Make an outsized reward, attract people to the cause, shine a spotlight on the cause, and hopefully sort of move the global needle in the right direction. So XPRIZE is a not-for-profit. We're based in Los Angeles. As an organization, it's been around since 1994. I think we've awarded 12 XPRIZes to date. And actually, some of our most successful programs in recent memory have been in the carbon dioxide management space. Next slide, please. So our first foray into carbon was the NRG COSIA Carbon XPRIZE. That was the project that I was initially hired at XPRIZE to work on. And the central question around this program was, how can we turn our CO2 liability into an asset? It focused on flue gas capture and then conversion of the CO2 into marketable, valuable products. And the whole idea was the team that converts the most CO2 into products with the highest value will win a big bucket of money. So the prize purse was $20 million. It was launched in 2015, and we awarded the winners in 2021. Next slide. So the whole idea, back in 2015, the whole idea of making valuable products out of CO2 was pretty nascent. I mean, there were people working on it, but it definitely wasn't in the mainstream sort of conversation. It seemed pretty novel. So a big part of this program was showcasing the various possibilities for CO2 derived materials, and basically trying to make the point that this isn't science fiction. We can actually make a whole bunch of good stuff. And in fact, most of the things that come from traditional fossil fuel sources can actually be made from recycled CO2. Next slide. So we had multiple rounds in this competition. In the semifinals round, we actually kind of went all over the world. We went to 26 sites in 20 countries. And no, not 20 countries, but 26 sites all over the place. And here's some photos of the teams and technology that were demonstrated at that time. Next slide. But one of the real highlights of this program was the final round of the competition, where we challenged teams to actually take flue gas, real flue gas from an operating industrial facility, and set up shop and make their products. And so as a part of this program, XPRIZE and the sponsors, NRG and COSIA, actually designed, built, and commissioned 2 test centers. This photo is from the Alberta Carbon Capture Technology Center in Calgary, and another test center in Gillette, Wyoming, at the industrial test, the ITC. So teams had to set up and demonstrate and produce their materials here. So over a couple of years, it was really cool. We got to see these teams sort of come to site and build sort of real operating. They were small, but they were industrial pilots, and they were processing real flue gas. Next slide. So this shows the integrated test center in Wyoming. Unfortunately, we had a couple of teams fall out of the competition due to COVID. Well, they competed from their home countries, but COVID was a real challenge. As it was for all of us in 2020 and 2021. Next slide. At the end of the day, we had 2 winners. We had the winner at the Alberta Test Center was CarbonCure. They're a company from Halifax. They make stronger, greener concrete. And the winner in the Wyoming cohort was CarbonBuilt. They're a startup out of UCLA, and they make a low CO2 concrete replacement. And it was really interesting as this program progressed to see many of the teams, in fact, most of the teams in the competition, zeroed in on the concrete industry as a really strong place to play as kind of early carbon tech companies. So next slide is switching gears a little bit. We actually, the same week that we awarded the NRG COSIA carbonNEXT prize, we launched our next program in carbon management, which was the XPRIZE carbon removal, sponsored by Elon Musk. And this program asks, how can we build gigatons of carbon removal capacity? So, the whole focus of this program had a slightly different tilt, which was on removal of carbon from the air or oceans and durable sequestration. So sort of shifting focus away from the industrial capture and utilization. So it's a kind of a different place to play. We have $100 million on offer. Like I said, it was launched in 2021, and we're due to award in 2025. Next slide, please. So the whole point of this competition is to build and run a working demonstration. And to be successful in the grand prize round of the competition, we want to see demonstrations of at least 1,000 tons per year. That's on net. That's carbon that's been captured from the air or the oceans and then sequestered durably. We have a durability requirement of 100 years. Beyond the demonstration, we want teams to calculate the fully considered cost of their solutions. That's at a projected megaton scale. So there's a bit of a techno-economic analysis that needs to happen to generate that number. And then finally, last but not least, successful teams need to make a case that their solution is scalable sustainably to a gigaton and beyond. So one of the fun things about this project and what makes it slightly different from actually quite a bit different from the last from the original carbonNEXT prize, the first carbonNEXT prize, is the scope of the competition. We really wanted to use this program as an opportunity to highlight all of the various ways that carbon can be captured and sequestered. And so we've really invited people to bring everything, anything you can imagine. We welcome things from these 4 tracks. I've got a bunch listed on the side of the slide here. We're also open to novel hybrid approaches and new things that anyone hasn't thought of before. So where we're at today, we've actually awarded $20 million to date. We have 80 million left to go. We gave away $5 million to student teams back in 2021. And then in April of 2022, we awarded 15 teams with $1 million each. So our intention with that was to try and put a bunch of money and create a lot of discussion in the community early on in the program. Then we give the teams a couple of years to really focus on developing and scaling up their solutions. And then in the final year of the competition, we do our detailed due diligence and award the final $80 million grand prizes. So this program has been very successful. I think, $100 million is at the time anyways, and I think it might still be the largest privately funded incentive prize in history. Elon Musk's name attached to it adds a lot of adds a certain panache. And so we had a lot of interest in the competition. We've got just shy of 1,200 teams registered in the competition. At the milestone round, we had 360 complete proposals, and reading through those proposals, almost all of them, not all of them, but a vast majority of them are new enterprises that were formed in order to compete for this prize money. So this is just one of those proof points that an incentive competition can really sort of get the ball rolling. The trick is, how do you keep the ball rolling? We've got to number up all those teams globally, so kind of check that box, but now we have to get all those teams scaled up. So that's kind of the crux of the competition and where we've been working the last few months. So in the next slide, you'll see a photo of our judges. Here they are presiding over the decision to award those 15 milestones back in April. The next slide just shows the names and sort of the high level breakdown of the 15 milestone winners. You'll see Canada has, Canada played a huge role in the carbonNEXT prize, and there's very strong representation from Canada in the carbon removal prize. So that's very exciting for me to see as a Canadian. Next slide, please. This is just kind of what's coming up next. In April 2024, we're going to name 20 finalists and then give them a year to demonstrate their solutions before selecting the winners in April of 2025. So one really important point is the competition is still open to new entries. So if anybody on this call is interested in joining the competition, you can do that. We're actually going to be dropping our final rules for the final round of the competition in a couple of weeks here. So I'd encourage you to follow along, sign up for our newsletter, and form a team or join a team if you're interested in participating. So the organizers kind of asked me to comment on what we need to do to unlock the next level of carbon tech. And so for me, the answer is pretty simple. We all need to just make it happen. At this point in time, we're much closer to zero than we are to gigatons. And that's true on both the emissions reduction side and on the carbon removal side. So we really need to, as a society, be firing on all cylinders. That means a diversity of approaches. That means making those approaches bigger and better, and getting them out to market and putting them into practice. So that's really kind of my role here, is to be a cheerleader and try to find ways to support the industry as a whole. Thanks so much for your attention, and looking forward to the Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Just before I hand it over to Ben, I do want to just quickly say, if you have any questions to the panelists, please do put it into the chat, and Shannon is going to collect them and going to ask them at the end of the discussion. Okay, so I'll hand it next over to Ben. Ben Rubin is the Executive Director and co-founder of the Carbon Business Council, a non-profit trade association with more than 75 companies working to responsibly restore the climate. Ben has led climate initiatives and campaigns for companies, accelerators, governments, and nonprofits. He's a research fellow with the Institute for Carbon Removal Law and Policy at American University, and a domain expert with the Carbon13 Climate Tech Venture Builder. Ben, thank you very much for joining us. We're glad to have you, and over to you.
Excellent. Yeah, very glad to be here. Thank you so much, Maxi, to you and the other organizers for putting on this webinar, to the other panelists I'm speaking with today, and everyone who joined in to hear different updates about where we're standing as we head into 2023, as this year ramps up, what some of the key outcomes are for COP27 and what that means for carbon management going forward into this year. So yeah, looking forward to the conversation, the questions from everybody, and I'll go ahead and dive in. So just a bit of quick context on the Carbon Business Council and who we are. We're a nonprofit trade association with more than 75 carbon management companies as our members. We're technology neutral. And so if you look through our membership on our website, you'll see companies based in Canada, the US, and all over the world that intentionally represent a range of approaches to carbon removal and carbon management. A red thread through all of our members is that we think innovation and entrepreneurship is going to be critical to help make gigaton scale carbon removal a reality. And then just as far as additional context about where we see carbon removal fitting in with these different pillars of climate action, we really see removals as a third pillar. So we might think of it as the 3 R's. There's reducing emissions, this crucial work of restoration and removing CO2 emissions from the atmosphere, as well as resiliency, preparing for the impacts of climate change. And so just context for where we see removals fitting into that mix, and intentionally in the graphic here showing some overlap between each of these, because there's co-benefits and points of connection between these different facets of CDR. I will specifically be diving into carbon management and carbon removal policy today. If you want to go to the next slide, I'll begin by talking a little bit about the US landscape, some of the key policies that have passed in the US, just so that we have some context here, talk a little bit about the global landscape as well. In the US, a lot of private sector innovation and investment is really buoyed by billions of dollars in support from the federal government in the US. Some of this groundwork was laid in the Infrastructure Act. When that passed, it allocated more than $12 billion for carbon management. And some of the funding opportunities we're seeing in the US, like the direct air capture hubs, when the Energy Department announced more than $3 billion in funding just in December, that was money that was earmarked and allocated from the Infrastructure Act when that was passed. And a highlight there is that the Infrastructure Act was bipartisan. Carbon management in the US is fortunate to benefit from bipartisan support. Last year, the Inflation Reduction Act passed in the US. One of the most noteworthy things in there is the increased incentives to remove CO2 and to manage CO2, also known as 45Q. And this is actively moving through this through the IRS and the rules making department now. There are a number of other provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act as it relates to climate, fairly landmark. And if anyone has any particular questions on that, happy to field them during the Q&A. Those two pieces of legislation, as far as the US policy landscape goes, are some of the most prominent and well-known. There's some additional pieces too to really call out and help get a full, complete sense of the picture about the supportive federal policy environment that we're seeing for carbon removal. That includes $1 billion that was allocated in the CHIPS Act for carbon removal research, development, and deployment. That nearly doubled DOE's current budget for these types of projects. There was additional money allocated for that in the recent omnibus spending package that was signed by President Biden in December. And really the momentum continues. Just in December, in that omnibus spending package, we also saw the first US federal procurement proposal for the federal government to help procure CDR. We're excited to see how that moves forward. It'll be run out of the Energy Department, and a lot more. These are just, again, a couple of snapshots at a high level of what we're working on in the US, but want to call out that we do have this supportive policy environment and bipartisan support. So that's what we're looking at here in America. If you want to go to the next slide to just talk a little bit about how we reach gigaton scale globally and where the landscape stands for that. There is a flurry of activity, obviously a lot happening in Canada, and I think a lot of folks know what's happening there. Across the sea over in the EU, also a lot of momentum. And towards the end of 2022, the European Union put out a proposal on a certification framework for carbon removals that's currently open for public comment, and so that will continue to be finalized over in the months ahead. But really, some of the work and some of the leadership happening, there's a lot of great momentum in Canada, a lot of work in the EU, a lot of work in the US, but that's not all. Kenya has also recently emerged as a carbon removal leader. Just a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C., there was a summit where Kenya was announcing different CDR leadership priorities. Kenya is planning to convene a conference for carbon removals this summer, where they'll be assembling different companies and stakeholders. And so it's great to see the potential for carbon removal to scale up in Kenya and Africa, and some other countries in the global south. And then beyond what any one country might be doing at the federal level, the state level, the local level to move carbon management forward, there is cross-pollination between governments to advance carbon removal. I think one of the best examples of that is the mission innovation, what's happening with the CDR mission. That is co-convened by the US, Canada, and Saudi Arabia. Several countries are members of that, and countries are actively working through carbon removal together. One of the outcomes of COP was this CDR mission announcing the CDR launchpad, where even more countries are coming into the mix to work on getting more CDR deployed. And so I think seeing this cross-border points of connection between governments, including in the US, Canada, and so many other countries all over the world, it's promising to see that as we think about the knowledge sharing, the resource sharing that will be needed in this scale up to gigaton scale removal. If you want to go to the next slide, wanted to talk a little bit about a recap from COP27. So what I've been covering is some of the policy landscape as we see it as we're heading into 2023 and beyond, and some of the work that we're building on over the last few years. But COP27 also serves as, I think, quite a catalyst for carbon removal. I was fortunate to be a part of carbon removals at COP, which was an effort to put together all of the different carbon removal events that were happening throughout COP27. And we're told that there was really a record-breaking number of events on removals. And I think something that's noteworthy about the carbon removal events that happen at COP27 is it represents a range of all of the different stakeholders who have a stake in carbon removal. We saw events organized by CDR providers, suppliers, carbon removal buyers, governments, civil society, and seeing all of these different folks thinking about carbon removal as this pillar of climate action, in no way to take away from that important work of reducing emissions and preparing for climate impacts, which were also on display at COP. But seeing carbon removal alongside those, I do think gives us a lot of momentum as we look towards COP28 and some of the marquee landmark moments of 2023, and can get a little bit more granular about how CDR itself played out in the draft text that the UNFCCC released around carbon markets, how it played out in the negotiation text itself. We'll dive into some of that in the Q&A just in the name of time. But again, a lot of momentum coming out of COP27, and this carbon removals at COP, it's just carbonremovals.org. If anyone is interested in checking out the website, a lot of the events were filmed, and so a lot of this footage is still available for viewing to get a different sense of where different stakeholders were weighing in, the announcements made. There's a lot of great content here on this site. And you want to go to the next slide? As we look ahead after COP, I think one key development that I think will be paramount both as carbon removal scales in the US and as it scales globally is reaching gigaton scale responsibly. And in that vein of responsible deployment, the Carbon Business Council is the originator of the Oath to Restore the Earth. And this is, our members have signed on to this oath, laying out different principles for what responsible deployment can look like. Removals working in tandem with that crucial work of mitigation and some other different elements. It's up on our website. It's public, and anyone is welcome to sign it. But we think that these tenets of responsible growth will continue to be really important for deployment, and we see that evidenced in policy. Something like the direct air capture hubs, as with that open funding application in the U.S. As part of the application, community benefit plans are required about what community engagement will look like, how communities will be benefited from CDR projects, and so this responsible deployment around CDR, I think, is going to continue to be paramount as we look into the year ahead and beyond. And if you want to go to the next slide, just to talk about, and I'll do this briefly for time, but just a table here outlining where we might see different growth areas in the carbon removal landscape. It's not necessarily limited to any one CDR stakeholder. I think we're on track and set to see increased private sector action of additional purchases of carbon removal. We're on track to see additional startup innovation and growth as new companies form in the space, and we see additional pilots break ground this year and additional CDR supplies coming on the market. And this will happen across all the different facets of CDR: ocean-based carbon removal, direct air capture, biochar, really spanning the gamut. Government policy, the policy frameworks we have over the last few years will continue. There's bipartisan legislation moving forward on CDR right now in the US. And so I think momentum will continue there. And then again, on responsible deployment, community engagement, and social license will continue to be paramount. And these are all interconnected. They all work together. What the government is doing on policy changes the calculus for private sector investment. And so they're very much connected. But I think these are four focal areas as we think about opportunities in the year ahead where we're likely to see momentum and growth. And then just as a final slide from me before I turn it over to Mark, a little bit on what's ahead. Some of this was looking back at the legislation and the policy landscapes that we're building on as we go into 2023, what happened at COP27, but just there's a drumbeat of activity that will be taking place over the next few months. These are three particular events, but certainly not all. It's a long and full calendar for the year ahead, which is excellent. But in Davos next week, it will be interesting to see where and how carbon removal is on display. I will be attending Davos, and if anyone else here on the line is, hope to connect with you there. In March, the IPCC is expected to release their synthesis report from this last cycle of scientific reports. Scientists around the world in prior IPCC reports have affirmed the need for gigatons of carbon removal in tandem with mitigation. And very likely, because this report is a synthesis, we'll likely once again see that affirmation. So much of what we're seeing with innovation, government policy, private sector market investments has been underpinned by the science. And so I think when this report is released in March, it will be an important moment for the CDR community. And then it still feels very far away, looking all the way ahead to November when COP28 itself takes place. But I think building on everything we saw at COP27, we're on track to see even more momentum at COP28. So a couple of key moments to call out. And with that, I just want to thank the organizers again for having me and thank my fellow panelists. And we'll turn it over to Mark, and looking forward to the question.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Okay, I'll pass it over to Mark, and we're very excited and We're lucky to have Mark. Mark has a long and distinguished resume. It's too long to explain in detail, but at a high level, Mark is the Vice President, External Relations of the Pathway Alliance, and has 3 decades of experience in government business and consulting. He has served in several senior roles in the government of Canada, including as Director of Policy and Research in the Prime Minister's Office. He has also worked in executive roles with Ontario Power Generation's Blackberry Hill Norton Strategies and is past Executive Director of Canadians for Clean Prosperity. Mark attended McGill University and the University of British Columbia and holds a BA and MA in Political Science from UBC. Mark, thank you for joining, and over to you.
Great to be here. For those who aren't familiar with the Pathways Alliance, maybe we can just go to the first slide. Pathways represents the 6 largest oil sands producers in Canada. We're collectively responsible for operating 95% of Canada's oil sands, so that's roughly 3.5 million barrels per day of production. And in June of 2021, those 6 companies all took a joint commitment to achieve net zero by 2050. So I don't know if we can advance the slide. And we all have a concrete interim target of 22 megatons reduction by 2030. So that's roughly from a base of about 83 megatons a year. So reducing by over a quarter our emissions between now and 2030. To achieve that, and this is really showing our plan over the next 30 years to achieve net zero, there are multiple phases and a whole variety of technologies are going to be required. The light blue on this chart is carbon capture and storage, basically conventional carbon capture and storage. But we're also actively exploring direct air capture, increased use of hydrogen, and direct air and small modular reactors and other technologies. But at every stage of the project, carbon capture will be an essential part of the mix. So if you move to the next slide, it shows our anchor, what we call our foundational project, which is 14, initially 14, it could ultimately expand to as many as 25 discrete carbon capture projects at oil sands facilities that would be linked by a pipeline that would run about 400 kilometers from Fort McMurray down to south of Cold Lake. And then in that number 5 there would be stored in a sequestration area, which is roughly 100 square kilometer area, where we have just recently been awarded the exploration rights to test the best carbon capture areas within that. But we estimate that there's up to a gigaton of storage capacity available in that area. So that initial phase 1 project linking 14 carbon capture projects, and those would involve carbon capture on in situ oil sands production. It would involve carbon capture on upgraders at some of our mining operations. That would be roughly 11 megatons per year of carbon capture by 2030. And then from there, it could scale up. Ultimately, we could see as much as 40 to 50 megatons per year of carbon capture. Of course, that could be displaced by other technologies. So if we move more to small modular reactors or increased use of hydrogen instead of natural gas, there may be less carbon capture and more on those other technologies. But at this stage, carbon capture is really the most important technology in order to be able to reduce our emissions footprint. This is a massive project. It's 16.5 billion in capital expenditure, about 25 to 30,000 jobs in the construction phase. So this is, this would be the largest carbon capture network and hub in the world. There are others that are on the books that are at a comparable scale, such as the Houston Shipping Channel hub. But this could well be the largest carbon capture project in the world if it all comes together between now and 2030. The next slide, this is just a little more detail on the map. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Alberta, this is all the northeast of Alberta. Fort McMurray is quite far north, and then Cold Lake is further south towards Edmonton, and then this links not all, but most of the major oil sands facilities in the province of Alberta are located along this corridor. So there are some others. There's some other operations in Westminster, Grand Prairie, and so on that wouldn't be linked. They could be potentially part of other carbon capture hubs, but this hub does connect most of the oil sands production in Alberta. And then if we go to the next slide, this is one point I wanted to make. There are some people who are skeptical of carbon capture and question, well, why don't we just reduce emissions? Well, this really shows that in order to achieve net zero, carbon capture has to be a major part of the solution. So this is from the IPCC. This is 4 of their 1.5 degree compatible scenarios. The first one, the LED scenario, that's low energy demand. That's the scenario where you simply reduce the use of energy and achieve net zero through that. We're not trending anywhere like the LED scenario. We're definitely trending to one of the other scenarios that all require basically the yellow bar at the bottom of these 3 scenarios is technological carbon capture, and then brown is carbon removals through increased storage in agriculture and forestry. So on any of the likely scenarios, we're going to require gigatons of carbon capture for the world to achieve its net zero goals. And Canada has a record as a pioneer in carbon capture. We have 4 major carbon capture facilities in Canada, which are sequestering more than a megaton each. We have the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line and the Quest project, both in Alberta, in the Edmonton and Red Deer area, and then we have in Saskatchewan, we have the Boundary Dam project and the Weyburn project. So Canada has a lot of experience with carbon capture. This is at this point proven technology, although there are newer technologies being developed all the time. And we are, the 14 projects that we're doing are the projects that have the purest carbon stream and are closest to the pipeline corridor. But as we move on and expand use of carbon capture, we'll be looking at carbon capture on more dilute carbon streams, and that will require new technologies that don't exist today, although many companies in Alberta and Canada and around the world are working on those other solutions for carbon capture on more dilute carbon streams. But we will require a massive amount of not only the existing technology like CCUS as it stands today, but new technologies as well. Michael mentioned that the first XPRIZE was the Energy COSIA XPRIZE. COSIA is Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, which is now part of Pathways. It's essentially our technology development arm. There are over 80 technology projects being currently worked on within Pathways. COSIA in its 10-year existence has worked on over 1,000 different technologies, about $1.8 billion of investment in technology development. So we're working today on the technologies that we know work, like conventional carbon capture, like the increased use of solvents to reduce our steam requirements for our operations. But in the future, we have a wide variety of technologies, everything from direct air capture to small modular reactors to hydrogen that we're working on extensively as well. Just in terms of COP, Pathways was a participant at COP27 this year. We had a presentation at the Canada Pavilion. This was the first year, I think, that the government of Canada had a pavilion at COP. It got a lot of media attention. There was a lot of NGOs that didn't think it was appropriate to have the oil and gas companies or oil sands represented at COP, but we thought it was a highly productive session and a really productive meeting. There was definitely a huge increase in interest in carbon capture from around the world, and there are projects being developed in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, and a lot of representatives from governments and industry in all those regions. We're very interested in talking to Canada just because we have a lot of concrete experience with carbon capture that we're bringing to the table. So it was also interesting in the final text of COP. There was language that came close to getting in, but didn't get in the end, about phasing out of unabated oil and gas production by 2050. And I think that the key word there is unabated. I think that language probably will come back in future COP texts. But clearly there is, a recognition that the world is going to need oil and gas, particularly natural gas, for decades to come, but that we can't continue to do it in a non-abated way, and that we have to reduce emissions from the production of oil and gas as much as possible and as quickly as possible. And that's really exactly what the Pathways Alliance vision is. So with that, I will turn things over to questions.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Oh, I am unmuted. Can we stop screen share and so we can see the panelists? Great, thank you. And my first question is actually a direct segue from Mark's comments on COP, and it was around, does this COP feel different in terms of the excitement and energy behind CCUS? So Mark, you already described that in a bit of detail, but maybe I can just ask Ben and Michael to chime in on this really quickly, just at a high level. We don't have a whole lot of time, so.
Yeah, I mean, I was thrilled to see the level of attention and activity around, not just I think the thing that excited me most was that it wasn't just about carbon. People were getting into the nuances of carbon management. There was lots of talk about emissions reduction as and how that's different from CDR, and how that complements ecosystem restoration. And so I think just the level of discourse I think took a step change this year, which I thought was really, really great.
Great, thanks, Michael. And how about Ben? Do you have any quick insights?
Yeah, I think just building on the points that Mark and Michael have made, I would say the diversity of stakeholders who are engaging in carbon removal is distinct and unique, that community is growing bigger and bigger. And then just appreciated Mark's point that he was referencing in the draft text. I think one thing that I want to call out in the draft text, although it didn't make it into the final, was that there was a reference that developed countries should go net negative 2030. And I think this concept of net negative will likely rear itself again at COP28 and in future policy conversations over the course of the year, which is essentially this idea that beyond only getting to zero, we can achieve negative emissions through some of the different carbon management approaches that Mark and Michael have been talking about.
Great, excellent, thank you. And moving up on to the next question, and that's focusing beyond North America. I think here we all have a pretty good sense on what's going on in CCUS in North America. Mark, you provided some of the Canadian key context. Ben, you provided some US context, but we have a less clear view on what's going on inside the rest of the world. Can you just share some insights on what you heard at COP on various aspects of CCUS and carbon management at COP? And Mark, you're ready to go, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that, as I said, I think there's increased interest in CCS around the world. I think as that graph I showed from the IPCC illustrated, there is no path to net zero that doesn't involve gigaton scale carbon capture, and that means not only North America, where we have relatively mature carbon capture, but many regions that have never considered it before are going to have to jump into the game. And I think that's an important opportunity for Canadian, North American companies where we have that experience. And we're getting calls all the time from other countries, other industries, asking for advice on carbon capture. Pathways has been asked to be part of the Net Zero Producers Forum, which was launched by the governments of Canada, US, Norway, Saudi Arabia, a number of others, for oil and gas producers to achieve net zero by 2050. So we're sharing our experience internationally, and to some extent, I think we can act as as a broker between some of the Canadian companies that we work with and other countries around the world.
Great, thanks, Mike. Ben, you talked a little bit about the activities in Africa and Kenya. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more, on what's going on there?
Yeah, I think one thing that's exciting, one organization that I mentioned is a global carbon removal partnership, which as the name has implied, has succeeded in bringing together several global leaders in countries from the global south and other regions who are actively thinking through how carbon removal and different carbon management approaches could be suitable in their country. I think one thing that we're seeing as different countries are looking into removals is because of different geologic storage capacity, who might be more suitable for ocean-based CDR, who might be more suitable for nature-based solutions. Different countries are looking for different approaches to removal, and cumulatively, that's just helping to grow and scale the overall CDR market. So it's exciting to see, I think, countries like Kenya, countries like Colombia, looking at CDR actively as part of their climate portfolio, as well as to see the cross-pollination through that CDR launchpad I mentioned that launched at COP, of countries actively working together to do knowledge sharing and work together on policy.
Great, thanks, Ben. Michael, anything you want to add?
Well, I think one of the themes that struck home for me was that, you know, people are starting to recognize that carbon management and carbon removal is going to be big business. It's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. And so I think a lot of countries, and especially smaller countries in the global south, are starting to realize that, you know, this could be a great opportunity for economic growth and economic development. And so, you know, we're seeing them stand up and raise their hands and say, listen, we're open for business. At least as far as carbon removal is concerned, carbon doesn't respect borders. And so, you know, come to my country. We have great capacity and we have great resources and we have a great workforce. So, so I think there's a great opportunity here for to support development through carbon removal.
Great. Thanks all. And this is actually a great segue to a reader question that popped up in the chat here to me. And that is, related to, so let me just read the question. While project development in developing countries should in principle be cheaper than in North America or the EU, in reality, the political risk, lack of fungibility between carbon markets, and lack of compliance drivers in developing countries and domestic subsidies programs like the US Inflation Reduction Act are pushing in other directions. How should Canadian CCUS and CDR project developers approach opportunities in Latin America, South Asia, and Africa? It's a big question, but maybe, Mike, you seem ready to go there.
A lot to digest there. I mean, I think, no, I'm not sure I have much to comment there. I mean, I think one of the real concerns here is when we start talking about the fungibility of carbon removal credits, making sure that the carbon removal industry doesn't fall into the bad old ways of colonialism. So we shouldn't be thinking about carbon removal as opportunity for socioeconomic arbitrage. We really need to be focusing on carbon removal as solving the sort of the technical engineering problem here. So, so I think there's, you know, this discussion around environmental justice and how that relates to carbon removal, I think is extremely important as developers and, you know, as folks who are kind of on this, you know, myself, who's kind of on the sidelines cheerleading for the industry. You know, we need to make sure that we all have a heavy respect and are encouraging sort of that level of fluency in environmental justice. That's maybe not a direct answer to the question, but that's what I got.
That's great, Michael. Thank you so much. How about Ben? Do you have any insights on how Canadian technology companies, how they should position themselves to advancing projects in the global south?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a couple of components to it. I think one is just really assessing the different unique geologic features that might make any one CDR solution or approach maximally beneficial to the community, maximally beneficial for the project itself. And again, that has to do with geologic storage, anything that might, any type of project. And so I think evaluating that along with where there's governance in place to be able to get the permits that will be required to have pilot or demonstration or actual project scale up. I think that landscape is important. And then I think, you know, one other thing that I would call out that we're seeing here in the US with the direct air capture hubs funding opportunity announcement that came out is that teams are working together in tandem on joint applications, that some of these projects, like as the name hub implies, it's in some ways could be larger than any one company. And so there can be a benefit to understanding where there's opportunities of partnership, especially around that possibility of finding local partners in a region that where someone in Canada might be interested in siting or developing a project.
Great. Thanks, Ben. I'm not, for sake of time, I don't think we're going to be able to get to all the questions that I have prepped. I do want to give the audience an opportunity to provide questions. So if you do have some important questions, please put them in the chat, and I asked Shannon to just highlight which ones we want to talk about. She's better at managing the chat than I am. I know
Yes.
there was, go ahead, Shannon.
Thanks, Maxie. We had a great question from Sean, who is from Carbon Minerals, who is an XPRIZE winner, I believe. And he was asking, yes, he was asking about recognizing that the world will need oil and gas for decades to come, but it cannot continue in an unabated way. The question therefore comes to mind, is there a sense of relative scale? How much does it matter to abate emissions associated with the extraction of oil and gas versus emissions from the use of oil and gas? Or is there an argument that abated Canadian oil will be the least worst option of the necessary use of oil and gas over this transition period?
I guess I can take that. You know, I think we have to do both. Oil and gas production emissions are about 15 to 20% of emissions. The combustion emissions are about 80 to 85%. So obviously we have to reduce the demand for oil and gas, and the impact of oil and gas it clearly in passenger transportation, that's moving very quickly. But there's a lot of other sectors where you simply won't be able to move as quickly as you can move you know, replacing passenger vehicles. There are a lot of other demands for oil and gas, and I think you're going to see increased demand for natural gas as we phase out coal. So we really have to look at not only reducing demand, but also at lowering the impact of production, and CCS is really critical in that. You know, certainly a lot of people in Alberta, I think it's Mac Wheeligan from ARC who came up with the line that, you know, we want the last barrel to be the cleanest barrel, and that should be a Canadian barrel. So this idea that we should produce the last best barrel, however, you know, whether that's in 2050 or 2060 or 2070, that, you know, there's no reason that we can't be the most efficient, low cost, low emissions producer. And that would surprise a lot of people, that the oil sands has a reputation for being a very, you know, high emission source and a very expensive source. But the capital costs of oil sands are essentially sunk costs. We don't have to do new exploration and drilling. We just have to figure out how to get costs down and get emissions down over the next 20 or 30 years. And you know, we think based on past performance that we can do that.
That's great. Thank you so much. Another question that's come up, and scaling up of food production is going to be something critical going forward as our population continues to increase. But we all know that emissions from food production is pretty significant. Was there any conversation around how CCUS and food production or ag tech can kind of combine and reduce the emissions there?
I'll just say from my perspective, one of the things that that's sort of surprised me as we launched the carbon removal prize is the interest in soil carbon and the intersection between carbon and agricultural lands. So, I mean, all I can say is really, there's a lot of people working in that space, and I think it's really encouraging. In an abstract sense, finding ways to manage carbon that reduce the competition for land is going to be extremely important moving forward, and as the population grows, the competition on land is only going to increase. So I think we all have to, again, it's about getting that fluency and making sure that we understand the impacts of a lot of these technologies as they scale up to very massive levels. What are we going to be competing for in terms of resources? And that's not just land, it's energy, it's water, it's all the rest of it. And then finding solutions that can be that can work in synergy.
Okay, thanks, Michael. We are at the top of the hour. I do hope that we can take one more reader question, one more one more audience question, and then I'll be very quick on my exit slide. But if the panelists can stay around another 5 minutes, that would be really great. And there's a question from Jason here.
Yes. So Jason's asking, the carbon removal launchpad requires that participating countries advance real CR projects by 2025. How can startups take advantage of this opportunity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that carbon removal launchpad that will be, we're expecting to see additional guidance coming from Mission Innovation soon. So I think for anyone that's interested in that particular opportunity, it'd be great for them to stay tuned and stay up to date. And I think similar to the way that we're seeing some innovative companies band together for the direct air capture hubs as the submissions are put in, there might be an opportunity for even more competitive applications by that kind of teamwork and collaboration. We're the mind for this, right? In terms of gigaton scale removal, that it's going to take a rising tide to raise all ships. So it's going to take working together across these multi-sector boundaries and different technological approaches and the rest. So I think that staying up to date with carbon removal launchpad as they issue more guidance and thinking about where there could be points of connection with others in the space could be two recipes for success.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Mark or Michael, do you have any other insights to this question on how can startups take advantage of the CDR opportunities by 2025? Michael, you look ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the zone that I'm living in, with the competition award being scheduled for April of 2025. So, again, it's like really, I'm here as a call to action. If you haven't started a team, then I encourage you to join a team. And what we're trying to do is make sure that we see lots of demonstrations of good, high quality, viable CDR. We want to see demonstrations up and running by 2024, and then demonstrating through 2024 and into 2025. And we think that if we can see lots of demonstrations of high quality CDR, we'll be sort of on the right path.
Great. Thank you. And Mark, how about from the Pathways Alliance, how can Canadian technology companies get involved with the efforts at Pathways?
I'd say the best thing would be through COSIA. Wes Jickling, who some people would know is the head of COSIA and vice president technology with Pathways. But certainly, if there's any companies that are not involved with COSIA projects that are interested, just send me a text or an email, and I'll try to connect you.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. I apologize for going over time here. Shannon, if we could just go to the last slide here. Just quickly highlight some of the exciting things going on. As I mentioned at the beginning, we did just launch our latest Industry Innovation Challenge, and it's called DAC to the Future Challenge with SASL, which is a South African oil and gas companies. So relevant to what we're talking about, carbon removal, direct air capture with action happening in Africa. So please click the link, and Shannon can put it into the chat as well. Really excited for this challenge. If you want to learn more about carbonNEXT, you have our website there, and the best way to stay in touch is to sign up to our newsletter. And with that, once again, I apologize for going over time by 5 minutes. A big thank you once again to the panelists. I learned a lot. I'm sure our participants did as well. And if anybody, will be sharing this recording on our website shortly. And with that, happy 2023 to everybody. Thank you, and I'm sure we'll see many of you in the near future.